Actor, comedian, and singer Jim Belushi left us almost 40 years ago. His vile addictions prevented him from making a long-awaited triumphant comeback to show business. John's death at the age of 33 left a noticeable dent in the industry. It's a universal agreement that his talent and unmatched charisma are impossible to replicate or replace. To this day, people keep expressing their condolences to his younger brother and fellow actor, Jim Belushi. Moreover, in the eyes of the public, John's passing deepened the chasm between him and Jim. Many keep stubbornly comparing the two brothers' careers. Jim will never be as good as John. Jim is only popular thanks to John. I don't agree. Jim is a good and funny actor in his own right. In this Rumour Juice video, we explore what the real relationship between the two famous members of the Belushi family was like, and how John's death affected Jim.
Good evening, I'm Marty McNeely for WGN News. Comic actor John Belushi died today at a rented hotel bungalow in the Hollywood Hills.
Growing up, Jim Belushi says he had two choices: either follow in John's footsteps and become an entertainer, or join their father's restaurant business. Well, have you ever heard anything about the Belushi family restaurant in America? We don't think so. Instead, the family name will most likely evoke warm memories of cult classic movies, TV shows, comedy routines, and great music.
Hey! John's coming home today! What's
There were 4 kids in the Belushi family. Their parents were Albanian immigrants who ensured that their 3 sons and 1 daughter respected their heritage. Jim, for instance, received honorary Albanian citizenship from the president of Albania. And John is featured on a 2008 Albanian postage stamp. So it's safe to say that the Belushi siblings have always stayed close to their roots. As a family of foreigners, however, the Belushis had their share of problems while trying to assimilate. John had met his future wife, Judith, while they were both high schoolers, and here's how she remembers John's struggles. "I think it was hard for John, going to this all-American high school in the day and coming home to this very Albanian family in the evening. None of us in the neighborhood even knew what Albania was." John also looked different from his peers. He was dark and very self-conscious about his ethnicity, but he didn't let his insecurities override his life-of-the-party personality type. In grade school, he may have been a mischievous little guy. During his high school years, on the other hand, he turned into a typical all-American boy. He became co-captain of his high school's football team, a talent show champion, and was elected homecoming king his senior year. His drama teacher noticed his talent and encouraged him to pursue a career in acting instead of becoming a football coach, and thus, John Belushi began his journey to stardom.
And then he went off and became this tremendous entertainer and talent. And he was very present.
Due to their 5.5-year age difference, John wasn't so close with Jim while they were growing up. Later on, the brothers managed to build a loving relationship. They've obviously had their differences, but it is evident that Jim Belushi is still fond of his older brother. His approval was like the sunshine, Jim Belushi said at John's funeral. You couldn't do much for John except get him an ashtray.
This is Joe Mel Jr. He's a sharp little guy, and we're expecting a lot from you today, little fella.
The younger Belushi sibling remembers how they took a trip to a bathhouse and John washed Jim's hair. John never said, "Hey Jim, I love you," but that day he did. Not in words, but he washed my hair. Has Jim Belushi ever felt that John's story overshadowed his? On one occasion, Jim agreed that his brother's personality and legacy were so big they crushed him, and admitted he had indeed been living in his brother's shadow, only to add, "But think about what a shadow it is, the metaphor of it. It's shade. I'm in the cool of the day." Also, he often remembers an old Chinese proverb that says, "When you drink the water, remember those who dug the well." In other words, Jim is thankful to John for digging the proverbial well, for clearing a path in showbiz for him to follow. "In my career, I have been drinking the greatest of spring water from a well that my brother John dug, and I am grateful." Tragically, John Belushi didn't only dig a proverbial well for his brother, he also dug his own grave. John Belushi's widow, Judy, wishes that instead of focusing on his drug abuse, people would remember all the other, way more positive things about him. It would be refreshing to have a story that actually celebrated John's beautiful life, his courage to forge the life he dreamed in an unfamiliar landscape, his dedication to his craft, his epic friendships, and loving temperament. After all, according to his wife, John Belushi was a symbol of his times. A hippie character from the 60s who brought rock and roll to comedy in the 70s and succumbed to his cocaine addiction in the 80s. A king of comedy who remained human and approachable. Unfortunately, it is impossible to talk about John Belushi and not mention the other side of his personality, the one that became synonymous with hedonism, appetite, excess, and overdosing. John Belushi started experimenting with drugs during his SNL days, trying to deal with the constant pressures of the weekly program. John was on covers of magazines and experiencing a whole new level of fame, John's colleagues muse. It became overwhelming for him, and that was expressed in all the late nights, the drugs. The drug problem soon became a threat to his career. He was fired from and immediately rehired to SNL several times due to his unpredictable behavior. The drug abuse was so bad, the Blues Brothers movie had a budget allocated to cocaine. Years on, co-star and closest friend Dan Aykroyd said it was common for drugs of that era to do drugs on set. Everyone did it, including me, but John, he just loved what it did. It sort of brought him alive at night, that superpower feeling where you start to talk and converse and figure you can solve all the world's problems. The Blues Brother director and another friend, John Landis, noticed how Belushi couldn't give the movie his all and went, quote, "from being this really sweet guy to someone hyper and maniacal." Belushi continued to promise his wife Judy that he would quit, but by early 1982, John was so stressed and depressed, and his drug use was so excessive, it alarmed his family and friends. On March 4th, 1982, a day before his death, Belushi saw his longtime manager twice, asking for money. The first time, the manager said no, as he suspected that Belushi would use the money to buy drugs. Later, when Belushi returned, the manager had a visitor and reluctantly granted Belushi's request. In the early morning hours of the day of his death, Belushi was visited on two separate occasions by friends Robin Williams and Robert De Niro, who wanted to have some fun with him. However, both of them felt uneasy when they saw how trashed Belushi's bungalow was. They also didn't feel welcome when they saw a woman named Kathy lounging around, so neither De Niro nor Williams stayed for long. It was Kathy, a former occasional backup singer and drug dealer, who injected John Belushi with a lethal mixture of drugs. Kathy would later plead guilty to involuntary manslaughter and several drug charges. She served 15 months in prison and was deported to Canada after her release. In 2015, Rolling Stone issued a ranking of all 141 SNL cast members of that time. John Belushi was named number 1. John Belushi was the live in Saturday Night Live, the article in the magazine read, the one who made the show happen on the edge. Nobody embodied the highs and lows of SNL like Belushi. Meanwhile, Jim Belushi, who also appeared on the show after his brother's death, was ranked number 72 and described as SNL's most reliable mediocrity. We don't think that Jim took any offense. When Dan Aykroyd invited him to fill in the void left by John in Blues Brothers, Jim thought it would be weird, but Aykroyd persuaded him. It's like a law firm. When one of the partners goes down, a brother comes and takes over. We've got to carry on the spirit and the legacy of the Blues Brothers. And what is Jim Belushi up to these days? He's growing cannabis on his 93-acre property in Oregon and developing a TV show about his business. Can you guess the brand's name? That's right, the Blues Brothers. Belushi's aim is to spread medical cannabis to people who need it. No family should have to go through the trauma of losing a loved one to opioids, the 66-year-old says. The business has helped him understand more about his brother's death and the trouble it caused for their family. It's about the mission from God, John dying from an opiate overdose. I want to save lives, families, and communities, Jim Belushi says, and adds, if Johnny was a pothead, he'd be alive today. John Belushi would have celebrated his 71st birthday this June. He is rightfully remembered as a film and comedy legend, but his body of work is tragically small. He was one of the 7 original cast members of the NBC sketch comedy show Saturday Night Live. He rose to fame thanks to his roles in movies like National Lampoon's Animal House and The Blues Brothers. He's had a handful of movies that were received with lukewarm enthusiasm. At the age of 33, he was intending to make a big comeback. He had several projects in development, including working on his own script. The role of Dr. Peter Venkman in Ghostbusters was originally written for him. Following John Belushi's death, the role famously went to his SNL colleague Bill Murray.
He slimed me.
That's great! Actual physical contact!
Murray's performance in Ghostbusters is iconic, but we cannot help but wonder what Belushi would have done with the character.